Thomas Hickey, a name that will remain in the history books of United States forever. He was a Continental Army soldier in the American Revolutionary War, and the first person to be executed by the Continental Army for mutiny, sedition, and treachery. The Continental Army was the army of the 13 colonies and the Revolutionary-era United States. It was formed by the Second Continental Congress after the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War, and was established by a resolution of Congress on June 14, 1775. The Continental Army was created to coordinate military efforts of the colonies in their war for independence against the British, who sought to keep their American lands under control. General George Washington, first President of the United States from 1789 to 1797, he was the commander-in-chief of the army throughout the war. The Continental Army was supplemented by local militias and volunteer troops that were either loyal to individual states or otherwise independent. Most of the Continental Army was disbanded in 1783 after the Treaty of Paris formally ended the fighting. The 1st and 2nd Regiments of the Army went on to form what was to become the Legion of the United States in 1792. This became the foundation of what is now the United States Army. The Continental Army consisted of soldiers from all 13 colonies and, after 1776, from all 13 states. When the American Revolutionary War began at the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, the colonial revolutionaries did not have a standing army. Previously, each colony had relied upon a militia which was made up of part-time citizen soldiers for local defense, or the raising of temporary provincial troops during such crises as the French and Indian War of 1754–63. As tensions with Great Britain increased in the years leading to the war, colonists began to reform their militias in preparation for the perceived potential conflict. Training of militiamen increased after the passage of the Intolerable Acts in 1774. Colonists such as Richard Henry Lee proposed forming a national militia force, but the First Continental Congress rejected the idea. Amongst these soldiers was Thomas Hickey, who came to America as a soldier in the British Army and fought as personal assistant to Major General William Johnson in the 7 Years' War 1756 and 1763, but later joined the Patriot cause when the American Revolution broke out. Thomas Hickey was a favorite of President George Washington. An Irishman and British Army deserter, Hickey joined the colonial militia in Connecticut and was later handpicked by President George Washington to join his elite Life Guard. Hickey proved a disappointment and was later jailed on suspicion of counterfeiting. While detained, he confided to fellow prisoners that he was turning his back on the cause of independence and actively recruiting others to support the British. Arrested by civilian authorities, Hickey was turned over to the Continental Army for trial. Hickey was court-martialed for his role in the plot against President George Washington, and pleaded innocent to charges of exciting and joining in the mutiny and sedition, and treacherously corresponding with enlisting among, and receiving pay from the enemies of the United Colonies. Hickey was found guilty on June 26, 1776. 2 days later he was hanged on June 28, 1776, at the corner of Christie and Grand Streets before a crowd of 20,000 spectators in New York. He was the first individual to be executed for treason against what would become the United States. Hickey was the only person put on trial for the conspiracy. During the trial, David Matthews, the mayor of New York City and a loyalist, was accused of funding the operation to bribe soldiers to join the British. Although the charge was never proven, Matthews and 12 others were briefly imprisoned. The initial plan was alleged to include plans to kidnap President George Washington, assassinate his officers, and blow up the Continental Army's ammunition magazines. These rumors greatly damaged the reputation of loyalists throughout the nascent United States. Although Hickey was jailed for passing counterfeit money, and then charged with sedition and conspiracy while in prison, William Spawn Baker, a late 19th century Washingtonian, believed that the real reason for his execution was involvement in a plot to kill or kidnap Washington. The story of the plot against Washington, like so many aspects of his biography, was embellished in the years following the Revolution. Hickey, according to the apocryphal version of events, became the chief conspirator in an attempt to poison Washington. He allegedly recruited Washington's female servant, who agreed to serve him a dish of peas, one of his favorite foods, laced with arsenic. But unbeknownst to Hickey, she let Washington know of the scheme. When he flung the peas into the yard and a group of chickens ate them and promptly died, Hickey was arrested. It's a great story, but one based on no evidence. Nothing in the official transcripts of Hickey's trial make mention of poison or peas. Although probably guilty on some level of involvement in the plot, Hickey was clearly a scapegoat and the victim of unequal justice. Terrified by the prospect of a Tory conspiracy against President George Washington and the Colonial Rebellion, officials wanted to send a message to all other potential conspirators, of which there were many, that all faced the gallows if caught, even those involved at the lowest level. President George Washington said as much when he wrote to John Hancock, President of the Continental Congress, after the execution. I am hopeful this example will produce many salutary consequences, and deter others from entering into like traitorous practices, he wrote. To another he wrote that he hoped it would be a warning to every soldier in the army. Indeed, every soldier not on duty that day was ordered to attend the execution. Hickey was the only conspirator executed. The 13 sent to Connecticut were never tried. Several conspirators, including Mayor Matthews, escaped. By fall the British had taken New York. Although he was the only one executed, Thomas Hickey, turns out, was part of a much larger scheme, one concocted by British loyalists to assassinate Washington, who at the time was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Thank you for watching Death Row.